The night that changed everything. Alright, listen up, because what I'm about to tell you is going to blow your mind. You think you know Keanu Reeves? The internet's favorite, good guy. The humble, soft-spoken legend who rides the subway like a regular dude, gives away millions to charity, and shakes hands with fans like he's just some normal guy. The man is practically a saint. But what if I told you that's only half the story? What if I told you there's a side of Keanu Reeves that Hollywood doesn't want you to see? A side so dark, so utterly insane, that even the people closest to him refuse to talk about it. Because one night in Los Angeles, everything changed. And Hollywood? They've been trying to cover it up ever since. The warning no one took seriously. It started with a phone call. A little past midnight, Keanu was wrapping up a late-night meeting with some studio execs in downtown LA. They were discussing his next big project, something that, according to insiders, was supposed to be bigger than John Wick, bigger than The Matrix. But here's the thing, Keanu didn't look excited. If anything, he looked uneasy. Someone, or something, had been bothering him for weeks. He had been spotted looking over his shoulder, checking his phone nervously, even refusing to talk to certain people on set. That night, as he stepped outside, a cold breeze cut through the empty streets. His driver was supposed to be waiting. But instead of his usual car, there was a black SUV parked by the curb. Keanu hesitated. Something didn't feel right. Then, his phone buzzed. One text. No name. No number. Don't get in the car. Now, any normal person would have freaked out. Called the cops. Walked away. But Keanu? He just stood there, staring at the message. His jaw tightened. His fingers hovered over the screen like he was debating something. And then, just like that, he slid the phone into his pocket, and opened the door to the SUV. That's the last time anyone saw the real Keanu Reeves. What happened in that car? According to street cameras, the SUV drove off at exactly 12:17 a.m., heading west toward the hills. No one knows exactly where it went. No traffic cams caught it turning off. No witnesses saw it stop. But here's where things get really weird. At 3:46 a.m., 3.5 hours later, Keanu's official driver finally arrived at the meeting location. He called Keanu's phone, no answer. He called again, straight to voicemail. Then, out of nowhere, the same black SUV reappeared. It pulled up to the curb. The door swung open. And Keanu stepped out. But here's the part that doesn't make sense. He was wearing different clothes. A completely different jacket. A shirt no one had seen him in before. And his face? His face looked off. The driver swears Keanu didn't say a word. He just nodded, walked to his car, and sat in the back seat, staring out the window. And the biggest red flag? His phone, the same phone he had been holding before getting into the SUV, was gone. The Keanu that came back wasn't the same. Now, look, maybe you're thinking, okay, weird night, but it doesn't prove anything. I get it. But here's where it gets even crazier. Over the next few weeks, people started noticing something was off. His closest friends, people who had known him for years, said he was acting differently. Less talkative. More distant. He started forgetting things, small things at first. Places he had been. Conversations he had. Even entire movies he had filmed. There's even a recorded interview from that month where a journalist asks him about his time shooting The Devil's Advocate, you know, the one with Al Pacino. Keanu just blinks and says, I wasn't in that movie. Excuse me, what? The interview got pulled from the network the next day. And the journalist? Fired. Hollywood's best-kept secret. From that point on, Keanu Reeves became different. People who had known him for decades say he wasn't the same guy anymore. His mannerisms changed. His way of speaking changed. Even the way he signed his own name looked different. And if you think Hollywood wasn't in on it, think again. Because after that night, something terrifying happened. Keanu Reeves, the man who had always been notoriously private, suddenly became available. More public appearances. More interviews. More social media interactions. It was like someone wanted to remind the world that Keanu was still around. But was it really him? Or was it someone else? Something else? And if so, where is the real Keanu Reeves? To be continued. What's next? This is just part 1, and we're only getting started. In part 2, I'll dive deeper into the eerie footage that surfaced after that night, the chilling patterns in Keanu's behavior, and why some people inside Hollywood believe the real Keanu never came back at all. But the biggest question remains. What happened in that SUV? And why is Hollywood so desperate to make sure you never find out? Part 2, the footage they tried to bury. Alright, if you thought part 1 was insane, hold on, because we're just getting started. Keanu Reeves gets into a mysterious black SUV at midnight. 3.5 hours later, he steps out, wearing different clothes, with a blank expression, and without his phone. And then, everything about him changes. His speech, his mannerisms, even his memories. But here's what no one expected, there's footage. The deleted security tape. 1 week after that night, a security guard working at a private estate in the Hollywood Hills came forward with a disturbing story. This guy, let's call him Danny, had been doing routine surveillance at an exclusive, members-only mansion. The kind of place where celebrities, billionaires, and politicians meet in secret. At exactly 2:52 a.m., one of the estate's security cameras caught something unusual. A black SUV pulled up to the back entrance. No headlights. No sound. Just rolling up slow, like it didn't want to be noticed. Danny, being a professional, zoomed in on the feed. And guess who steps out of the back seat? Keanu King Reeves. But this wasn't the Keanu the world knew. Danny swears his face looked off. Like, stretched. His movements were slow, almost robotic. And when the SUV door shut behind him, he just stood there, staring at the ground. Then, without a word, 2 men in suits, faces hidden by dark sunglasses, even though it was the middle of the night, flanked him and led him inside the mansion. At 3:14 a.m., the footage cuts out. Not because of a glitch. Not because of interference. Because someone erased it. The man who saw too much. Danny knew what he saw. And he knew this was way bigger than just some celebrity sneaking into a party. So, like any sane person, he made a copy of the footage on a flash drive. The next morning, he tried sending it to a friend in the press, but before he could, his phone shut off. And I don't mean the battery died. I mean completely wiped. Factory reset. No contacts. No messages. No recent calls. And the flash drive? Gone. His apartment had been broken into while he was at work. Nothing was stolen, except for that one piece of evidence. Danny freaked out. He tried talking to his boss about it, but the guy just looked at him and said, "Forget what you saw. Trust me." Then, just like that, Danny was fired the next day. No explanation. No paperwork. Just gone. And that's when he realized, this wasn't just about Keanu. This was something bigger. The people Keanu avoids. In the weeks after the SUV incident, Keanu started doing something weird. For the first time in his career, he started avoiding certain people in Hollywood. Not the press. Not the paparazzi. But specific A-list celebrities. And not just any celebrities, the ones known for being untouchable. You know the type. The ones who always seem to be at the top. The ones with impossible levels of power in the industry. If Keanu saw one of them at an event, he'd leave early. If they were backstage at an award show, he'd stay in his dressing room. And if they tried to approach him, he'd just nod, smile politely, and walk away. This was not the Keanu Reeves people knew. And it only got weirder. The creepy interview that got pulled. One of the biggest red flags happened during an exclusive interview in early 2023. Keanu was on a late-night talk show. Normal stuff, right? Except, something was off. The host, who we'll just say is a very famous talk show personality, was asking him standard questions about his career, his past movies, and his love for motorcycles. Keanu answered like usual, cool and collected. But then, the host leaned in and said, with this weird grin, "You remember that night in the hills, Keanu?" And Keanu? He just froze. Like, full body, deer in the headlights froze. The audience laughed, thinking it was a joke. But Keanu wasn't laughing. His hands clenched into fists. His breathing got shallow. For a second, it looked like he was about to get up and walk out. Then, just as quickly, he forced a smile, leaned back, and said, "I don't know what you're talking about." The host chuckled. "Oh, I think you do. That episode never aired. Gone. Wiped from the network's archives. Clips of it were scrubbed from the internet. The only reason we know about it is because a few people in the live audience posted about it on Twitter before their accounts mysteriously disappeared. The pattern no one noticed. After that, Keanu started playing along. He started going to the right events. Saying the right things. Being the perfect version of himself the world wanted to see. And maybe, just maybe, that was the point. To make people forget. To erase whatever happened that night in the SUV. But here's the problem. You can't erase patterns. And if you look closely, you'll see it. The way his body language changed. The way he stopped talking about his past. The way certain questions make him visibly uncomfortable. And the biggest red flag? Keanu Reeves hasn't aged in 20 years. Like. At all. What if Keanu is no longer Keanu? Think about it. The man has been in Hollywood for decades. Yet, while everyone else around him grows older, he stays the same. Some people call it good genetics. Some say he's just lucky. But after that night? After the black SUV? After the erased footage? After the talk show slip-up? You really think this is just a coincidence? Because if you ask me, the real Keanu Reeves never came back that night. And whoever, or whatever, stepped out of that car. It wasn't him. To be continued. What's next? This is just part 2, and things are only getting crazier. In part 3, we'll break down the hidden symbols in Keanu's recent movies, the bizarre behavior his co-stars have called out, and why some insiders believe Keanu is part of something bigger than Hollywood itself. And the biggest question of all. If the real Keanu Reeves is gone, where is he now? Stay tuned, the hidden messages in his movies. Alright, if you've made it this far, you're starting to see the pattern. Keanu Reeves went into that black SUV. 3.5 hours later, he came back, different. The security footage? Erased. The talk show interview? Pulled. His closest friends? Noticed the change, but said nothing. And the biggest red flag? Keanu Reeves, a man in his 50s, looks exactly the same as he did 20 years ago. But here's the thing. Keanu knows. He knows something happened to him that night. And he's been trying to tell us, the only way he can. Through his movies. The messages hidden in plain sight. Let's start with something obvious. Ever notice how Keanu's movies, especially in the last 20 years, seem to have the same themes over and over? A man who doesn't age. John Wick, The Matrix, Constantine. A man who loses control over his own identity. The Matrix Resurrections, Replicas, A Scanner Darkly. A man trapped in a world that isn't real. The Matrix, The Lake House, The Neon Demon. And then there's John Wick. The story of a man who was forced back into a world he thought he left behind. Sound familiar? Because after that night in the black SUV, Keanu Reeves was never the same. John Wick, the movie he never wanted to make. Here's something weird. Before John Wick became a massive hit, Keanu almost turned it down. He was hesitant. He didn't want to do it at first. Why? Because, according to insiders, the script was too close to home. Think about it. A man who had something taken from him. A man forced into a war he didn't ask for. A world where rules are made by unseen, powerful figures who control everything. Now, here's the real kicker. The original John Wick script. Completely different. The first version had John as an old man in his 70s, coming out of retirement for one last mission. It was meant to be a tragic, self-contained story. But then, something changed. The studio rewrote the script. John Wick was made younger. The story was reshaped into something bigger, a franchise about a secret society pulling all the strings. Keanu signed on. And once the cameras started rolling, people on set noticed something disturbing. Keanu's strange behavior on set. Multiple sources from the John Wick crew reported that Keanu was different while filming the first movie. He barely spoke between takes. He avoided looking at himself in mirrors. Some days, he showed up exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. And then there's the most chilling report. One crew member, who worked as a lighting tech, said he overheard Keanu talking to himself between scenes. Not like rehearsing lines. Like, having a conversation with someone who wasn't there. And at one point, Keanu muttered under his breath. "This isn't me. This isn't real." Then, when he realized someone was listening, he went silent and walked away. The Matrix Resurrections, his desperate warning. Now let's talk about The Matrix Resurrections. This movie was different. Way different. It wasn't just another sequel. It was a cry for help. Think about it, what's the movie about? A man who realizes his whole life is a lie. A man controlled by a system that won't let him go. A man trying to escape, but trapped by forces beyond his control. And here's the weirdest part. Keanu didn't have to do this movie. He was done with The Matrix. He had moved on. But when Warner Brothers called, he said yes immediately. Why? Because The Matrix Resurrections wasn't just a movie. It was a message. A message he knew Hollywood would let him say, because they thought no one would take it seriously. But we're taking it seriously now, aren't we? The moment that proves it all. Let me take you back to a real-life moment that should make the hair on your neck stand up. During the press tour for The Matrix Resurrections, Keanu was doing an interview in front of a live audience. A fan asked him, "What's it like being back in The Matrix?" Keanu paused. Then he chuckled, leaned forward, and, completely deadpan, said, "Who says I ever left?" The audience laughed. The interviewer smiled. But Keanu didn't. What if Keanu is trying to tell us the truth? Here's the final piece of the puzzle. Hollywood actors promote movies all the time. They do interviews, red carpets, social media posts, you know the drill. But Keanu? He's different. He never talks about his personal life. He never discusses what happens behind the scenes. He never engages in controversy. Because he knows. He knows that one wrong move. One slip up. And it's over. So instead, he does the only thing he can. He puts the truth in his movies. He hides the messages in plain sight. And he waits for someone to notice. So what happens now? We've connected the dots. We've seen the patterns. But there's still one question left unanswered. What really happened that night in the black SUV? And if the real Keanu Reeves never came back? Where is he now, the one person who knows the truth? Alright, if you've been following this story from the beginning, you already know. Something happened to Keanu Reeves. He got into a black SUV at midnight. 3.5 hours later, he came back different. The security footage? Erased. His behavior? Changed forever. And we've seen the patterns. The movies that hint at his real-life struggle. The interviews where he almost slips up. The disturbing signs that the Keanu we know today might not be the real Keanu at all. But here's what no one expected. There's someone who knows exactly what happened that night. And this person? They've been trying to warn us for years. The director who said too much. In Hollywood, the people who work behind the scenes see everything. They know which actors are protected. They know who's been blacklisted. And most importantly, they know who's hiding something. And one director, someone who worked with Keanu early in his career, let something slip. For legal reasons, I can't say his name outright. But let's just say, if you've seen some of Keanu's earliest films, you know exactly who I'm talking about. This guy had been a close friend of Keanu's in the early days, back when Keanu was just another young actor trying to make it. But something happened between them. Because after Keanu's mysterious transformation, this director went from praising Keanu as one of the best actors of his generation to refusing to work with him ever again. And in 2019, during a podcast interview, he was asked a simple question. Would you ever make another movie with Keanu Reeves? His answer. He hesitated. Looked visibly uncomfortable. Then, finally, he said. That's not my call. The host laughed, thinking he was talking about studio decisions. But the director shook his head. And then he said something that still gives me chills. I don't know who he is anymore. The man I knew is gone. The host tried to press him on what he meant. But the director shut down the conversation immediately. And just a few weeks later, that entire podcast episode disappeared from the internet. The people who tried to speak out, and vanished. This isn't the first time someone close to Keanu tried to say something, only to be silenced. Over the years, there have been at least 4 different people, actors, assistants, even an old friend, who hinted that something was deeply wrong with Keanu. And guess what? All of them either disappeared from Hollywood or changed their story. 1. The assistant who quit without warning. In 2015, a longtime assistant who had worked with Keanu for over a decade suddenly quit. She just shook her head and whispered. He knows. Then, she deleted all her social media and left LA. 2. The actor who went off the grid. One of Keanu's former co-stars, someone he worked with back in the 90s, was doing an interview in 2017 when the conversation turned to Keanu's mysterious private life. At first, the actor laughed it off. But then, they said, Keanu is not Keanu. Not anymore. The way he talks, the way he moves, it's all wrong. I tried bringing it up once. He looked at me and smiled. But it wasn't a real smile. It was like something pretending to be human. The post went viral. People started asking questions. Then, suddenly, the user deleted their account. Gone. Wiped from the site. And when reporters tried to follow up, no one could confirm who.